Welcome, residents, to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is producer Richard, and across from me is the Doctor himself.
Hello.
Each week, we talk about the weird and wonderful world of DC. While fielding questions from listeners like you, I have spoken.
Wow. Nick Nolte himself, somehow. I still can't get over that was Nick Nolte.
I have spoken.
What was his name again? Queel?
Yeah, Queel.
Yeah. I have spoken. Yeah. I love that guy. I can't believe that was Nick Nolte.
I know. It makes sense, though, right?
It does and it doesn't. It's like kind of not crazy enough to be Nick Nolte, but it's almost like, oh shit, did I just remember that Nick Nolte can act?
Well, here's the thing. I don't actually know if that was Nick Nolte in the makeup.
Well, yeah, I assume not, but his voice though, right?
So that's the thing. You're taking a person who's insane, not putting them on camera, and then being able to cut and paste everything they say.
I just thought I would always be able to recognize Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
I've sort of made a name for myself that way, so I'm a little bit upset that I missed the mark.
Hey, Mandalorian, do you like my little dog? He's got a weird thing with tiny dogs.
Do you know which? I've got a couple of favorite Nick Noltes.
Okay.
One of them is Nick Nolte from Ang Lee's The Hulk, where he plays Bruce Banner's dad.
Yeah.
And he becomes the absorbing man at the end, and he's just like bites that electrical cable, because that's the crazy Nick Nolte I signed up for. And I kind of like him as Gerard Butler's dad in Angel Has Fallen.
Oh my God, I haven't even seen those movies.
Do you know what? They're fine. They're not good, but they're fine.
Is it like, are they based off like a book series or something?
I don't think so.
It feels like a Vin Diesel-y kind of thing. Like someone was just...
It's totally stupid, but it's like
Gerard...
It's serviceable action. You know how the 80s were just lousy with like okay action? It's that, you know? And I think if we weren't in this like social media era of like it's got to be amazing or shitty, those movies would do fine. I mean, they've made 3 of them. They're doing fine.
It just feels like...
I think they're making 3 more of them.
Jesus Christ. Like Gerard Butler just wants to be an American. Like, there's nothing I care about more than the freedom of America.
Olympus has fallen. London has fallen.
Yeah.
Angel has fallen. Next one is Cosmos has fallen, when I go into space.
Yeah, and when he gets really, really old, it can be, I've fallen and I can't get up.
Yeah, where he just hits his life alert like necklace. Just they have to install one of those stair lifts in his house. It's the bathtub with the door in it.
Yeah, exactly.
The Terminator.
That's just my like action music. It's the perfect action music.
The Terminator theme is the perfect action music. I agree.
You feel like something's coming, but also like you're going to do something about it. It's the perfect music. Yeah. It's good. We got one piece of news today.
Only one
piece of news.
Light news week.
Well, I don't like. So if any of you residents are ever wondering why we don't talk about comic book news, one, I don't want to spoil it, and it's like 90% spoiling, and it's also spoiling it for us because we get the comic books late.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're even up on it. So what's the point of talking about the things that are in the comics if like most people aren't on every single issue?
I suppose that's fair. I mean, the problem with pop culture, quote unquote, journalism is most of it is just someone being like, here's a panel from the thing, and then every other site goes, hey, they posted something, can we post the same thing?
Yeah, what's great is that I just go to the one that does that the most. So I get it from everywhere, baby. Yeah. But also most... That's why
I don't work for that one anymore.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I hated doing that. Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah.
It's the worst.
We still use it. But
still use it. Great resource.
Yeah. I just don't want to be part of that.
I just don't want to be part of it. I don't agree with them fundamentally.
Yeah. Only you only want to be like a third like step down from it. Then you can't feel guilty.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't know that people are coming to us for I don't think people are like, I just listen to the first 20 minutes and I turn it on.
If you do that, please let us know.
That would be very funny to learn.
Or if you feel strongly enough about it, do you want us to just get rid of the news? I mean, we could do that too.
I don't want to get rid of the news. There's fun stuff to talk about in there. But yeah, I mean, if it's about just like this happened in a comic, that that's less cool to me than like the casting news or, getting little like images from TV shows or little teases and stuff like that. Like that's cool news.
I just don't want this to be the first 15 minutes of Lock the Gates.
Ayo.
Haha, gonna take you down, Marin.
Oh yeah. He's had his eye on us for a while.
I know. We're really been copping his shtick, so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Have we?
I don't know. I'm a miserable Jew. I feel like that's basically the same thing. Let's talk about the one piece of news.
Sure.
And I feel like it might be a piece of news we've already talked about, but
let's do it.
Strange Adventures joins DC Black Label.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So Strange Adventures is the upcoming series from Tom King and Clay Mann and Mitch Gerads about Adam Strange. So they did, Mitch Gerads and Tom King did Mr. Miracle, and then Tom King and Clay Mann largely together did Heroes in Crisis. So now the three of them together are doing this Adam Strange 12-issue series that, the hopeful side is it's going to be just as good as Mr. Miracle.
Yeah.
We'll see. But I'm excited for it because it's a cool character and neat to see him in the spotlight. But yeah, okay, so it's going to be Black Label. Okay.
I thought it was just a story of this podcast. What a strange journey it's been.
Well, yeah. I mean,
I'll see you next time.
I'd be lying if I said I fully understood what Black Label truly means. Some things mean that
we want to have vertigo, but we don't want it to be vertigo.
Well, but some of them, like the question is actually like a different comic format. Like it's a different size. And then others, it's just like, it's a Black Label one. It means it's not in continuity. And then they're like, well, 3 Jokers is Black Label, but it is continuity. So like Black Label kind of right now means nothing at all other than you may see someone hang brain. Looking at you, Batman Damned.
I mean,
that's kind of all I know about that. So maybe Strange Adventures is considered mature enough for that. But
I mean, you're getting more Tom King, right? So
yeah, I just, I don't know. Mr. Miracle, he stabs Darkseid in the eye and says, like, fuck you a bunch. I mean, they bleep it out, but
maybe he was actually saying, fuck Batman.
Right. Well, no, they just bleeped. He still said you. Why would you bleep out you?
I don't know. To me, it's a bad word.
You?
Yeah.
Me or you?
You.
You?
Yeah.
Me?
No, you.
You.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's on third?
Who's on first?
Not my version, baby.
I don't know who's on third. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, again,
I love the artwork.
The Black Label thing just is meaningless to me. I'm excited for this series, though. It doesn't really matter to me where they put it.
Yeah.
I'm just looking forward to it. So
hey, it's your same mentality towards me. So
it doesn't really matter where you put it. Just looking forward to it.
We were this close to having a candlelit dinner the other day. This close.
Yeah, you left before the power went out.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, the power may.
I would have been in no state to take advantage, though.
With the sparks that were flying, I can't imagine that the electricity could have gone out when I was there.
Well, yeah, that's why the power went out. Is because I was shorting out the circuits. That's why those sparks were there.
Oh God. All right. I guess we could. I've got no transition towards this. This is the one that I have no. But comic books have rules, and speaking of rules,
wow.
Yeah, that's top notch today.
Wow. I'm excited for this one. It's slightly different than when we normally do because we're not.
It's not really a trope or a theme or a character.
Yeah, exactly. Or a storyline.
Yeah.
We're talking about something kind of more meta to comics because it's about the publishing. This week we're talking about the Comics Code Authority, which from like 1954 until officially 2011, basically was this sort of like self-regulatory censorship body that made sure that comics weren't too salacious or violent or things like that. I say technically 2011 because it was still technically in existence until then, but most of its teeth were removed by the 80s. But
yeah. Which is surprising considering like Reagan era, you would think that it would have come back. with Nancy Reagan's insanity. Like,
Well, I mean, we'll get into it as we answer questions, but there are a few things that change the code over time. I mean, the before we do the questions, the things you really need to know, the beats that you really need to know, is that there's always kind of been, or always was at the start, a sort of a pushback against comics.
yeah,
That like and their influence on children, right?
Yeah.
Children used to be the primary audience for comics, and now it's man babies. You hear me?
God damn it.
So that there was this psychologist named Frederick Wortham
Okay.
who basically published this book called Seduction of the Innocent, and in which he basically asserts that comic books sort of incite like lecherous and criminal and debaucherous tendencies in children. He basically blames society's ills on comic books, which is of course ludicrous, but it's the same type of argument that we hear, about violent video games or things like that nowadays. It's essentially the same argument. It has very little statistical validity, and when you learn a little bit more about Wortham, you realize that like he included the things that helped his argument and deliberately omitted the other things. So there's a lot of like his research is kind of spurious that way.
Yeah.
But essentially this Seduction of the Innocent came out. It was post-war, and it sort of ended up going before there was a House Judiciary Committee on juvenile delinquency or something like that. And they started calling like comic book publishers like to testify.
Really?
And stuff like that. And essentially, as this thing was mounting and people were worried about what are comics doing to our kids, the comics industry was worried that the government was going to step in and regulate them or censor them. So the comics industry decided to do it themselves so the government wouldn't. So the Comics Code Authority was, like I said, it's self-regulatory. The comics industry said, these are the rules of the Comics Code. You don't get the little seal of approval unless your comic like doesn't have, overt sex or violence. You couldn't like use the words horror or terror or stuff like that. Like
Wow.
on the cover, at least. It basically banned a bunch of like classic monsters. Like you couldn't use vampires and werewolves and stuff. Or zombies even. Basically, the comics industry said, we'll set this up. This is the little seal that proves that none of those things are in there. And that way the government doesn't have to come down on us because we're doing it ourselves. We're being the responsible ones. But they made it so strict and stringent because they were so paranoid about government interference that it was like a really ludicrous sort of thing. And then over time got sort of chipped away at. But it's a huge part of comics history. So I thought it would be cool to spend an episode talking about it and its impact and stuff like that. We got a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So it's clearly something people want to know something about. So, yeah, I mean, that's the very brief cursory overview before we get into it. And we'll learn more as we go.
People had a lot of questions. I was surprised. I wasn't expecting so many questions to come through.
I mean, we're this many episodes in. We've got a pretty good audience of engaged listeners.
Who are you trying to convince here?
We've got an audience of 12 listeners.
All right, well, why don't we start diving into them then?
Let's do it.
All right. Going to Facebook.
Going to the face and the book. Going to the Facebook.
First question comes from the most interesting resident.
I
don't know why you're going,
Drew Delgado.
Yeah, oh, okay. You just...
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, well, of course. Why wouldn't you have gotten it? I mean, we've been doing these enough that I feel like you should just know at least most of these drops.
I think for the annual, I want a supercut of me trying to figure out who the most interesting resident is.
Yeah, I got nothing else going on. Why not?
You're not busy.
Yeah. Andrew asks, how do you think DC would have developed over the decades if the CCA and the push leading to it had never happened?
Oh, geez. Right. The alternate history hypothetical. So
that old.
Well,
thing.
I mean, to talk about this, let's talk about a couple of the things that maybe were deemed problematic before the CCA came into effect. So, like I said, the Comics Code Authority comes in 1954, which means that the early, like the golden age, essentially, exists before the Comics Code Authority. Because
really?
Showcase
the Bronze Era then?
Showcase number 8 or number 4, I can't remember the number, but whichever one that Barry Allen debuts in is considered the start of the Silver Age. That's 1956.
Okay.
So Golden Age is basically all before the Comics Code Authority. So we're talking about all of those old Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Justice Society, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, in those comics, there was a certain amount of like, you're just seeing lots of crime and criminals and like mobsters and things like that. Like the first few Batman comics, like his first story is called The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. It's from Detective Comics 27. And you see like he's trying to solve this crime. He comes in a room and someone's like stabbed in the back. You see the knife in the back.
Yeah.
And not to step on the toes of a question that I think is later, but if you see a reprint version of that story from later when the code was in effect, the knife is not in the back.
Really?
There's just a body lying on the ground.
Oh.
They've taken out the knife.
Jesus.
And that's a very mild example. I mean, there's things that aren't DC where like entire pages are changed or dialogue doesn't make sense anymore because they've removed knives or guns or elements from the panels that they're directly referencing.
Oh, that's weird.
So it's, like I said, the code was, I think it was loosely based on like a movie production thing because movies had at one point sort of come under the same sort of fire. Yeah. But they made the comics code like super strict. Like you basically like you couldn't show any criminal to be sympathetic. Like that was like a rule. Mm-hmm. There's no like, oh, I understand his motivation because it's like, no, that will make kids do crimes or they'll tell kids that crimes are okay. So couldn't have that. No violence. You like any sort of even just like a bit of cleavage or whatever, they would like cover it up.
Wow.
That's not to say that they were doing better representation of women because they were not. It was just like, hey, shouldn't you be in the kitchen? It was like, hey, shouldn't you be in the kitchen? Nice top. It was like that was pretty much the difference.
You can't have big tits like that if you're going to be making bacon.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're trying to imagine what it would have been if the CCA never existed, I would like to think that, for example, Batman may have stayed a little more pulpy, detective-y.
Yeah.
Instead of going quite as, colorful, costumey, silly villains, There's Batman characters that just didn't show up for years because they were considered too violent or sexy or gross or whatever, right? So I would like to think that Batman would maybe have stayed or become or leaned into more of that sort of Dick Tracy kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to speculate, but Superman may not have become quite the symbol of outrageous optimism that he is now.
Yeah, just
because the first few Superman ones are like, "You commit a crime again, I'll punch you into the sun." He's like, not
yeah,
not specifically, but he's kind of aggressive.
Yeah,
he's a bit of a bully, but he's just bullying the bad guys.
So it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, some of those things may have changed. Wonder Woman probably would have a more interesting Silver Age history, because it wouldn't be just like people like, I don't know how to write this broad. It would have been like,
I can't show her tits. Then what am I supposed to do?
There would have been more of this sort of like that Marston-y kind of bondage, kind of, like all that kind of stuff that was like, what's in Wonder Woman?
Yeah,
they would have just kept doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to speculate, but I suspect that we would have gotten slightly different tones for some of the characters we know and love now.
That being said, I mean, the flip side of that is that like Wonder Woman could have gotten a lot worse. They could have taken because I mean, regardless of it, they were kicking Marston out of it. So I think that.
Well, yeah, I mean, Robert Kanigher sort of famously just hated Wonder Woman.
So I feel like they could have made her just even more of an object.
I suppose that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that everything the CCA did was bad. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, interesting.
I think that, I mean, I'm all for a tiny bit of censorship, given like if it's in the idea to like make something less like crude.
Sure, yeah.
If it's for no purpose, I would say. But
I think that's a good point that you've brought up, though, is that, you know, without the CCA there, and then if you have someone like Kanigher take over Wonder Woman, what's to stop her from just being an object?
Yeah,
like completely undoing everything Marston had wanted.
I mean, kind of that happened anyways because they turned her in basically just a housewife. But
well, they made her and they just clearly didn't care about it. They made her very silly, and yeah.
Not that just a housewife is the thing, but I think that if you have got superpowers and instead you don't use them.
That approach to female characters certainly was a thing, yeah.
Sure.
That's interesting.
All right, next question comes from We've Only Just Dandon. I like that. So that's we're leveling it up.
Well,
now.
you know, we got to keep escalating.
Wait till I get the live orchestra in here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the San Francisco Men's Choir.
We.
Save it for the live show.
Yeah, God.
Where we do that live show at The Rock.
Oh my God.
We do a live show at Alcatraz where we belong.
Why is it at Alcatraz?
I don't know.
Oh, it's just the first thing that came out of your mind.
That's what all I think of when I think of San Francisco.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
I think of Welcome to The Rock.
See, when I hear The Rock, I just immediately think Dwayne Johnson.
It's you.
Yeah.
Oh, you think of Dwayne Johnson?
By the way, I watched Fighting with My Family last night,
which is
that movie about the wrestler Paige. It was basically she had written a book. She's one of the like WWE divas.
Sure.
She wrote a book about sort of like she was like basically the youngest WWE like champion to ever get brought in, as well as being from the UK, one of the few like UK talents that have been brought in. So she wrote a book about that because her whole family is like a legacy of wrestlers, and she's been growing up since she was 13 being a wrestler. And they made a movie of it with what's his name from Shaun of the Dead?
Simon Pegg?
No, the other one.
Nick Frost?
Yeah, it plays her dad.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah,
I like him.
Yeah, and it's basically just like her story of of like this fighting family who then she gets brought into WWE and like trained up to become like one of the champions. But Dwayne Johnson's in it a bunch
as himself.
Yeah, and it's very much like there's a scene.
Do they de-age him?
No.
Okay.
They don't play him as younger. They basically it's as if her story was happening like now instead of happening when it actually happened.
Okay. I thought they were using like the Irishman technology on The Rock to like give him his hair back.
No, it was very funny though because
it doesn't matter.
He does get defensive of it because there's one point they're like they're commenting on the hair and he's like it's a choice, which is really funny. But he's actually, I mean, obviously he's really funny in it.
Of course. Yeah.
But there's a scene where when they first get brought into the WWE just to like go through like the first round of like selection for the potential people who could eventually go to training.
Yeah.
They bump into him backstage, and her brother, the main character's brother, is also a wrestler, and he's obsessed with The Rock, obviously. And so, but he goes like, "Oh, like we're just excited to see you." And he goes, "Okay, cool, I'm gonna leave." And then he starts walking away, and they go like, "Rock!" And he turns back, and he comes, and then they ask him another question, and it like literally happens like 6 times. And then the last time, they're just like, "Do you have any like any advice for like talking with the audience?"
Yeah.
And he turns around, and then suddenly he like becomes heel, and he's like, "You're gonna ask The Rock how to like talk to the audience when you're just this bunch of Mary Poppins, Harry Potter mother," and he's just like flips out on them, and he's just like, "I can't believe," and they're like dead silent, and then he's just like, "That's how you talk to an audience." It's a very good movie.
That's awesome.
It's a lot of fun. But the best part is like at the very end when they finally tell her that she's officially like a WWE champion. The Rock like takes her. Well, I mean, it's not a spoiler because it's a true story. The Rock goes like, "Oh," he's like, "I want you to call your family." And so she's like, "Am I in trouble?" And then like Nick Frost answers the phone, and he's just like, "Hey, it's The Rock, Dwayne Johnson." And he's just like, "Yeah, fuck you." Like, I don't give a shit. And he hangs up on him, and so she calls back, and she's like, "It was The Rock," and he's just like, "What?" And he's like, I love you, The Rock. And Dwayne Johnson's like, I love you too.
That's funny.
It's a cute,
I'll have to watch it.
It's a really cute movie.
What were we talking about?
Dan Dunn asks, can we talk about the changes in Batman that came about because of the code? Do you think some of the changes were for the better? So this
sure
directly addresses the thing you were.
So let's talk
about.
More specifically about some of the stuff I was dancing around a little bit. So I mentioned that sort of if they ever reprinted stories from pre-code in the code era, they would have to go through and change like the line of women's tops.
Wow.
They remove knives or guns or stuff from scenes. The code had a bunch of other things too, and you'll understand how this affects Batman. You couldn't portray law enforcement in any way that eroded public trust or made them look corrupt or things like that. Which is, remember, Batman's whole shtick.
Batman does these things because police are corrupt. Literally.
Yeah. Which means that what it had to turn from was, instead of being a corrupt city, it had to just be that Batman was better at their job.
Yes.
So it's like they're all working together, but you couldn't have a thing where the cops were after Batman, because then that would make Batman the criminal. So you couldn't portray that. So
is
now
that
it
how
had
Commissioner
to be,
Gordon got brought in?
Well, no, Gordon was already in there, but it's how you get what eventually became the 60s Batman thing, where they leaned all the way into the camp, and they were just like, oh, we deputized Batman. Yeah, Batman works for us.
Batman's a tool that we use. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that wasn't necessarily how it was in the comics.
We put the light up, and then he comes and deals with the problem.
But it changed that relationship, right? I mean, and you think of that's the reason Batman exists, right? It's because the system doesn't work because there's corruption and stuff like that. But you weren't allowed to depict anything that would erode public trust or anti-authority sort of sentiment. I mean, if this sounds like Orwellian or terrifying,
propaganda,
it absolutely is. But that was the fit. I mean, we're also in that McCarthyist.
Yeah,
we're on the verge of Arthur Miller being called before the House Un-American.
Yeah.
Activities Commission, because he wrote Death of a Salesman, where he was basically like, the American dream doesn't exist.
And we're probably heading back in that same way.
I mean, it's never existed is the point of that play. But
I mean, we're also probably heading back into that kind of...
Yes, you're right. Into that era where it's like, what'd you say about my America?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that just made me think of a couple of weeks ago where I was talking about Son of Vulcan.
My God.
The gods don't love us. The fuck you say?
That's so
We're gonna beat shit out of you,
little pussy.
So Batman.
Yeah.
So that is one thing.
Yeah.
That is sort of outrageous when you think about it. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I mentioned that a couple of characters basically didn't show up in publication for over a decade.
Yeah.
One of them is Catwoman. Basically.
I mean, I guess,
didn't show up until into the 60s. Probably only because of her popularity on the TV show.
Yeah.
But she was deemed too sultry, too also the thing where it's the comics code had a specific thing where it was all crimes must be resolved and punished. In the comic.
Really?
So that idea of the cat and mouse thing where it's oh, I stole a dime, and it's maybe next time, Batman. And you couldn't do that under the code.
Yeah, if she did something wrong, she needed to be punished.
Exactly, which completely defeats the purpose of that sort of femme fatale kind of thing. It was, I read a thing that was her relationship to Batman is very much like the Sherlock Holmes, Irene Adler kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
No, not like Moriarty.
I mean, a little bit.
I mean, kind of, but more like Irene Adler, where she's sort of out for herself, but there's this sort of tension. So between the sexiness and the fact that she wasn't allowed to get away with stuff, Batman couldn't let her go.
Yeah.
He was like, well, what do we do with her?
Yeah.
So she barely showed up. Two-Face didn't show up for over a decade, maybe 2 decades.
Corrupt politician. I mean,
corrupt politician goes crazy, but also he was deemed too grotesque.
Oh.
So for the same reasons that you couldn't have zombies or vampires or werewolves, you couldn't depict Two-Face.
Jesus.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. I mean, Two-Face, this isn't about the comics code, but Two-Face doesn't even show up on the TV show. Harlan Ellison wrote what was going to be a Two-Face episode, a 2-part Two-Face episode for the Batman show, but it just never got made.
Wow.
Because I think it was deemed too dark.
Wow.
That wasn't specifically about the comics code, but it's the same sentiment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like a couple of iconic Batman characters just weren't in the comics. Even Joker was totally neutered, basically, to the point that he just became like you got a pie in your face, Batman.
I'm sorry, is that Jay Leno?
Yeah.
That's a pie in your face.
Hey, Batman.
Take out my car.
Pie in the face.
Look at a lot of
Yeah,
cars.
it's a kind of crazy thing here. You got a pie in the face.
What the news, Batman? Yeah. Thanks, Jay.
But I mean, the Joker still showed up in Batman stories, but he couldn't kill. He couldn't, like they took away all the things that made him Joker from those early comics to the point that they were like, this character's boring now. They basically wrote him out. He didn't show up again, from sometime in the 50s or 60s probably, until into the 70s with Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil. They're like sort of Bronze Age kind of run on Batman. So it did affect Batman greatly. It shifted the tone to that sort of silly thing. Also, they had to be very part of the reason the comics code came into effect is because of like the swirling rumors about Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson.
Really?
That relationship was one that they were like, what's going on here? And they were, which is fucking stupid, of course. But, yeah,
Wow.
It was just this very reactionary, very Puritan kind of
fear-based,
fear-based sort of thing where they thought like anything in a comic book was going to set your kid on the path to like, what if he becomes gay because he read Batman, or like what, like all that kind of just stupid shit, Yeah.
Jesus.
It totally affected Batman big time.
I mean, he's going to turn gay because of watching Batman, but that's more about just because he's a zaddy.
Oh, not like Jake Garrick, mind you, but
Bruce Wayne can get it.
He can. It's true.
He can afford it.
Yeah.
All right, let's leave Facebook.
All right.
And go to a text.
A text?
Yeah, I got a text from Kyle.
Okay. Text. Beep up boop.
Oh God!
Text coming in.
Look at you, just on the cutting edge of technology.
Yeah.
You know how texts come in.
I'm going to extend this. I'm going to extend this offer again to Kyle. If you want drops for This Is Rad, we're your guys.
It's my weekly rad. Whoosh.
Weekly Rad.
Well, there you go. I mean, cut it out, put it in the
There
episode.
you go.
That's what you got. Your
Just
thing.
send that little sound clip to them. Let's make a whole soundboard for them.
Kyle's question is: do you think the code is responsible for the arrested development of mainstream American comic books?
Simple question.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Because it put a damper on more nuanced storytelling and, like that idea that you couldn't portray criminals sympathetically. It was like, you stole something, you're a piece of shit. It was like, there's no version of like, well, is this because of poverty or,
Yeah.
There's no, I mean, it was such a tool of that kind of fascist sort of thing, right? So in a way, yeah, I mean, that stunts the growth of the medium. It stops it from becoming actual literature. Like we've talked with Kyle a lot about things like the Vertigo comics and stuff like that. That is some of like the highest art literature. It just happens to be done in graphic format, in comic format. Like Sandman or Hellblazer or Swamp Thing or things like that. I mean, the code actively inhibited that. They were like, these are for kids, and that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, kids maybe made up a larger percentage of that reading audience, but it also meant that was the only audience they could ever be for, because the code for a long time didn't evolve until like the 70s.
Well, I mean, a thing that Kyle and I were talking about as well is like, I mean, you can see the reasoning behind. I mean, you can see that it was Arrested Development just based off of look at the rest of the world and how comics have advanced.
Yes.
I mean, they've literally like turned into art forms. Like if you look at Japan
Yep.
with manga and like,
I mean, when I was in Europe, like in Belgium, the Belgian sort of national art form is the comic strip.
yeah,
That's not to say that they were putting strips in the Sunday paper that were like, look at your own racism or like anything like that. I mean, listen, Tintin, racist as hell.
oh yeah,
But they were still doing things, and could extend beyond that capacity if they so chose. Some things were for kids and some things were for adults. And the Comics Code did sort of hamper that. So, I mean, yes. I guess the bigger question is, we know that the Comics Code was crazy stringent and that the comics industry did that to themselves so that they could say, listen, we're doing all we can. Yeah. Government doesn't need to step in here. But that also brings up if they didn't do it, if they were like, no, this is art, then
what if the government?
If the government was quote unquote forced to take action, what would that have done?
Yeah.
Would it have been worse?
Yeah.
I actually don't know.
Well, I mean, a good example
It's possible that it wouldn't have, but it could have been that they were like, oh, you really don't want to change? Well, we're going to fucking make you.
Well, I think the government would get involved when they were trying to specifically put the public's opinion towards a specific thing. Looking at Looney Tunes, and like during war times, the way that like a lot of the animated television turned into like war propaganda and like profiteering and things like that.
I'm not going to remember the name of the legal settlement too, but there was something early on that basically determined that films. Part of the reason that movies had a version of this code that then the Comics Code was sort of loosely adapted from is that there was some sort of early legal battle that determined that the First Amendment didn't apply to motion pictures.
Wow.
That like
there's too much money in motion pictures. They're not going to let that happen.
They were not guaranteed freedom of speech or something like that. Or they couldn't use First Amendment rights to defend putting overly salacious, whatever that was. There was some sort of legal battle, and I think comics were probably worried about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think some version of this, probably just because of the climate of the times and all that stuff, and how prevalent this stupid seduction of the innocent thing was, some version of it would have happened anyway. All of it would be to blame for stunting the growth of American comics.
I just think that it would have turned more into a larger propaganda machine for the government. I think that's probably what it would have happened.
Possibly, or I mean, the Comics Code was more stringent than that Hollywood, like the movie one, the production code or whatever they called it. So maybe it wouldn't have been. It's hard to, it's hard to speculate, but like either way, it was going to have roughly the same impact. It's going to basically say, these are for kids. They must be written at this level. They can't deal with anything challenging. They can't present any shade of gray.
It's the same thing that happened with the television, right? Like it's closer to what television turned into.
It completely robs it of artistic agency. Yeah. You can't be artistic or artful in a black and white world where the morality is sort of basically like shoved on you by the government. Yeah. That's the antithesis of art. So yeah, I think it was always going to hurt it.
For sure. I just think that you really saw it in like kids animation for television, I think.
Yeah, although I mean, look at the Looney Tunes has stuff in there that is, don't get me wrong, by today's standards, deeply problematic.
Yeah.
But when you think of what they weren't letting comics do, for example, Bugs Bunny routinely dresses and acts as a woman.
Yeah.
Flirts with other men.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Good luck getting a comic published under the code that even comes near that.
Yeah.
Looney Tunes got away with shit comics never could, because comics were like, we want to make this so airtight the government will never come after us.
But I think that's what happened was like, but then Looney Tunes also was a resource for government like intervention and used them to get like war things, like war propaganda across. So I think that like you pull away some of the censorship, but you pull in the propaganda machine.
Yeah, that's true too.
I see that would be the balance, is that you're really using it, because I think government doesn't really care that much about censorship as much as they just care about like getting their point across.
I take your point. Yeah, it's not really because it's never really about protecting anyone. It's about controlling the message.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you're right. I agree there.
All right, let's leave this text and go to
Beep bop boop.
Twitter.
Twitter.
There we go. Protecting your virginity by day and by night. It's organ night. Yeah.
Nice.
Really think quickly on that one. Do you think there were any benefits to having a comics code? Very simple. I think we talked a bit about it.
Yeah.
I think that there is some value in at least not like over sexualizing. I think they definitely went too far in the other direction. But I think that like I think there's something to be said for that, and like children seeing violence is never like. That if the intended was if these were written just for children, I don't think that children should be at like a very young age seeing overt extreme violence.
Sure. Yes, I don't disagree.
I think that slight part of the intent was okay.
Yes, but like everything,
Yeah.
totally like corrupted that intent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Now, there were recurring.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, it sure does.
Go.
So, except for Superman. Easy Colin.
Oh God.
Is that the first time we said the name?
I think so.
Um,
Just slams the door.
you say it 2 more times.
Yeah.
Goes through the mirror.
Yeah.
There were recurring villains before the code.
Okay.
So it's not like the code made this happen. But I think if you didn't have the restriction of like the non-violence sort of thing, or like non-gruesome violence, you may find that there would be a lot fewer recurring villains. Maybe you'd have a small stable of ones that are so bad they get away, and then other ones would just be like Batman would not even necessarily kill them, but they would die.
Yeah.
You know, like, or more than they did. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if we would have fewer sort of the stable of villains without a code. It's not to say that, you know, like we would still have our Lex Luthors, we would still have our Cheetahs, we would still have our Jokers and our Catwomans and stuff like that. But I wonder if like then we wouldn't have, you know, Mad Hatter. Right, because Mad Hatter's just like, well, we just got rid of him.
Well, that's the thing. I think that they were forced to be able to go, these ones work. Let's just keep using these because it's
like we can't kill him at the end, so he goes to prison. It's like, well, he's gonna get out of
but
prison.
also, like, I don't want to like test out something that's going to get denied and have to go through all the work to do that. When it's like we've got these like.
Oh, I see what you're saying too. Yeah,
we've got this rogues. Let's keep using them.
Yes, it also made a bit of a framework. Yes, we know what the pattern is with a Riddler story.
Yeah.
We know what that is probably also fair. Yeah, again, these speculative ones are a little hard to say, but I would hazard a guess that maybe we owe sort of the richness of certain rogues galleries, or the longevity of certain rogues galleries at least, to the code. Not even richness, like Heatwave is not a great villain.
No,
but would we have gotten that many Heatwave stories if they didn't? If they could just be like, well, let's just fucking kill him.
Yeah, let's just use this other guy. Like, I have a crazy idea. Let's see if it works.
You know, like one of his heat pack explodes and he burns to death. Like, you know, like, if you don't, you know, would we get Heatwave today? Maybe not. But yeah, I sort of have a suspicion that we have more rogues today because of it. So it's probably a good thing.
I want to see Heatwave on an island. Then we have a Heatwave, a tropical Heatwave.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next question comes from the Senator.
Oh, James
Paulson,
son of Paul,
who asks, "What were the first comics to be majorly affected by the CCA? What do you think would have developed differently if it had never been created?"
I think this is a good time to talk about a fellow named, I think his name is
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. If you all have a moment, I would like to tell
a really cool guy I know.
Yeah.
He might be a little weird. He's got long
he had
hair.
Some wacky ideas. I know we've done this joke before, but I love the idea that we get like 100 some odd episodes in, and then all of a sudden,
Now the real
I
message
start
comes
missionary
out.
work.
Yeah. This has been the idea the whole time. We really Katie Holmes you guys.
Oh no. Let me tell you about Xenu.
Yeah.
So a gentleman named William Gaines.
Yep.
So we've talked a lot about obviously the DC stuff. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's technically under DC's umbrella now, but EC Comics.
Yes. It's so easy.
It's so easy. EC Comics were largely horror and suspense comics. I think they also published Mad.
Oh, really?
And William Gaines, I think he was like the publisher or the editor or something like that.
He'd love to work out. Got all those gains.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, no pains, no gains.
That's right.
His comics, he felt that the comics code and this discussion of things was directly aimed at him. Because like I said,
Really?
you couldn't use words like terror or horror or things like that in your titles. And he had comics that were like tales of horror or
Wow.
terror and suspense. Like those were like his comics. And so he took particular exception to it. And when this whole thing was happening, he appeared in front of that House Judiciary Committee on Juvenile Delinquency or whatever it was called. And he did not have a stellar showing.
Oh.
He basically kind of got, in the way that cross-examinations happen, he sort of got badgered into saying that this particular depiction of violence was acceptable in a comic of his. It was like a horror comic about a vampire or something like that. And he was saying like, it's a vampire story. Yeah. But
Someone's blood's going to get stuck. Yeah.
But someone, like, the way they made it come out, he basically was just like, yeah, it's fucking fine. And then everyone was like, it was basically like, yeah, I ordered the code red.
Yeah. But guess what? Regular Mountain Dew wasn't available.
You're goddamn right, I ordered the code red.
I was going to game all night. What do you expect me to drink?
What a twist for that movie.
I know.
Yeah. He was just talking about his drink. He,
Yeah.
went to prison for life.
Yeah.
So essentially, EC Comics almost overnight, like they had to cancel books. They tried to put things out with different titles and tried to like make new, but like they couldn't use vampires anymore. No zombies, no werewolves. All those horror stories, classic tropes, gone. They couldn't use words like terror and horror. Gone. It decimated their readership. Mad only got away with it because it moved to magazine format and technically wasn't a comic book.
That's smart.
But yeah, I mean, the comics code, like within a year or two, just basically eradicated EC Comics.
Mm-hmm.
It ruined them.
Jeez.
So more than anything else, more than superheroes, more than any other one, EC Comics took the brunt of it. It basically, because it targeted war comics, horror comics, romance comics took the worst hit from it because that's what they were about.
Jeez.
All the stuff that the code was trying to stop was what those comics were about. So superheroes could kind of slide through. I mean, if we want to talk what's a plus side of the CCA, maybe the reason that we have such a plethora of superhero stories is because they're the only ones that fucking made it.
I mean, yeah.
Maybe we would have more of those genre comics if it weren't for this.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, look at.
I say plus side. I mean, we've said the opposite. Wouldn't it be nice if we had more genre comics?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at like Japanese manga. Like they fully embrace a lot of that, like romance comics and things like that. Like,
totally. Yeah. So I mean, that's the clearest example that I've got is those horror comics. They took away what they could make the comics about in terms of the content because you couldn't use a bunch of those classic monsters. Yeah. You couldn't depict anything too grotesque or scary or violent, which is the heart of horror. Yeah. If there's no threat of that, then like there's nothing scary.
Yeah.
And you couldn't even call it horror. So now people are just like, oh, like tales of mystery? or like whatever the other thing was like, well, that's not really what I'm looking for.
Story about
So yeah, those three, horror, war comics, and romance comics, but specifically the EC Comics publisher, worst hit, hardest hit, first hit by the CCA.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's I think that had they still existed, I'd be curious to see what we would have now. I mean, we're only just now starting to really dip back into horror comics again. Like,
well, you know what survived through this? Mostly superheroes, at least in terms of mainstream American comics. So then by the time you get to the era where the teeth of the code are sort of being pulled and you get Alan Moore, he takes Swamp Thing essentially. I mean, the original Swamp Thing appearance by like Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson is essentially a gothic horror, but it's not too scary.
Yeah.
Not much happens, but it's sort of like that. Feels like a Woman in Black kind of that gothic horror sort of thing. Then they write a more superhero-y one because they ordered that to series. It doesn't really take.
Yeah.
People don't love it. And so then when Alan Moore comes in on issue 21 or whatever to replace them, he goes, all right, let's go horror.
Yeah.
And that becomes the Swamp Thing we know. The reason that it's cool or it lasted at all. So when you get into those later eras where the code didn't matter so much, then those genres start creeping back in, but they could only, we just didn't have genre comics, or at least not the preponderance of them, or not with the commercial viability.
Yeah.
So now they're sneaking in under the guise of superhero things. And that's sort of where we are now, right?
I mean, we may have never gotten a Swamp Thing had it not existed, because I think that its popularity came from it being a thing that people hadn't really seen.
That's true. Maybe it wouldn't have been as revolutionary if we had ongoing successful horror comics the whole time.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say there were not horror comics in the intervening years, but they were, like I said, heavily neutered. If you've ever wondered why, I mean, I don't know much about the character, but
you do know something about being heavily neutered, but
I do now. Yeah. If you've ever wondered why Marvel has a character called Morbius the Living Vampire, it's because you couldn't have a real vampire, you couldn't have someone undead.
Yeah.
That was them like getting around the code. Like,
yeah. Well. Yeah, let's go to the next question. Next question comes from MadSeb77, who asks, when did you notice that the comics code served no purpose and the stories were better for it?
When did I notice? Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't grow up in that era. And when I was reading my dad's old comics, I wasn't reading them and being like, wow, they really, really held back here. Like I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like my conception of the code is so divorced from its actual timeline, right?
Yeah.
Like the comics that I read from my dad are mostly in the 70s when they're starting to push boundaries. Like I've got the Death of Iris West. So, and she dies on panel.
Oh, yeah.
Like Thawne puts his hand into her skull.
Jesus.
So we're already moving past the original structure of the code in the 70s, right? So I don't think I really understood it until as an adult, interested in comics and going back and reading old things. So yeah, I mean, I don't have it's not like it was like a light bulb moment for me or anything. I think I came to it somewhat academically because it's just from reading about things, right? I didn't have a moment while I was reading comics where I was like, oh, here's the turning point, because I think I was just separated from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next question. Comes from our favorite religious representative.
Ooh, Chris Chan.
That's right. And I think
Chris Chan wants to sit down and talk about Jesus Christ.
That's right. I mean, he's wearing sandals and got long hair. He's a little bit of a hippie, but...
And he loves the beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's walking on water.
Yeah. Walking on broken glass.
Walking on broken glass. Boop, 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 boop,
Whoa. Did you getting a text? Yeah.
So the text drop should be Annie Lennox's version of Walking on Broken Glass.
Yeah, sure. That's how we'll get there.
Yeah. I like it.
It was all pre-planned.
I like how we finally come around to Annie Lennox. That's good.
Yeah. I'm so surprised that it had taken this long.
I am too. I love Annie Lennox.
Of course you do.
She's great. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah. Till we find out what bad things she's done. Meatloaf.
Oh,
I know.
I
Killing.
don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Don't bring it up.
Why don't we do a double about it?
I wanted to, and now I don't want to anymore.
Well, I think we should now.
No.
I want to see you get torn apart. More than just the other night.
You beat me to it.
It's not the first time I've beaten you.
Oh, Jesus. What does Chris Chan ask?
Oh, what does it even matter?
Well, I know.
You just brought it up, but let's get a little bit more deeper into it. Marvel ignored it in a lot of ways. Why didn't DC?
So there's a sort of famous instance of Marvel ignoring the code. To understand this, though, we have to understand how did the code get enforced, right? Because it's self-regulation.
Right, yeah.
But comics in those days, remember, you could get them at grocery stores, corner stores, gas stations. There weren't necessarily comic book stores.
Really? Eh?
I mean, there may have been, but that's not where the bulk of comics were.
Not every town had a comic book store.
So what happened is distributors, the wholesale distributors, would say, if your comic doesn't have the seal on it, we're not buying it.
Okay.
Because then they were worried they'd get in trouble.
Yes.
So that became the sort of enforcement branch.
Just from distributors.
Exactly. In the 70s, the government itself went to Marvel and wanted them to do a story about drug abuse.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, comics were like, we don't want the government to shut us down. Here's our really strict code. And then the government was like, can you do something that's against your code? And the code said, you cannot do something against our code. What about the government? And Stan Lee was like, the government asked us to do this. I'm just going to publish these without the seal on it.
Yeah.
So he didn't like cheat or anything. He just said, this will not get approved by the code. So the code seal's not on it. He released, I think it's like 2 or 3 issues of Spider-Man that is a story about drug abuse.
Yeah.
Depicts it as a problem, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes back to putting out issues with the seal on them. But he just, like, the government asked me to do this, blah, blah, blah. And it was fine. Like, it still got put out.
Yeah.
Because the distributors were also like, well, we can't
Not
sell Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And so it highlighted this issue
Yeah.
that the code was so strict that it was like, oh, we can't even depict that drugs are bad. It was like, oh, okay, there's
There's a problem.
a problem there, which ultimately led to a revision that said you can depict drugs as long as you depict them as bad and like life ruining.
Yeah.
After that change was made, then DC's famous
Speedy?
Green Lantern, Green Arrow issue with Speedy came out.
Yeah.
Because DC would not defy the code. Stan Lee didn't give a shit. He was like,
Stan Lee not giving a shit?
Yeah.
That's really surprised me.
yeah. On the similar note, though, of the weird rules thing, so I've mentioned all of these monsters you couldn't use, but we know that there is a famous comic book creator named Marv Wolfman. And there was a story, I don't remember what story.
Wolf man?
And but this story references at the beginning that it's being told by the, blah, 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 this Wolfman. But comic book lettering doesn't distinguish between lowercase and uppercase. So what happened is they went to the code and they said, if we can make it clear that we're talking about Marv Wolfman, will you let us publish this with the word Wolfman, that the Wolfman is telling this story? And they said, yeah, sure. And that's what led to DC giving writer credit at the start of their comics.
Holy shit.
Because it said writer Marv Wolfman, and then it said, we're listening to the story told by Wolfman. And that's how they got around that in the code. So the code was full of these things where it was so strict that it was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like,
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So this Stan Lee one, this Marvel one, is like a one little blip thing. But essentially the government was like, we want you to do this. They were like, but this is the thing we set up against the government, so the government wouldn't come after us. And that is part of what started taking the power away, right?
Yeah.
Because then they amended the comics
And
code
as soon as you
to allow for some depictions of that. You could allow I think after that revision, whenever that happened, like late 70s, early 80s,
Yeah.
you could depict individual like corrupt law enforcement or things like that, but it couldn't be like the whole police force. You know what I mean? And they had to meet justice, but you could it started basically chipping away at the thing. So then through the 70s and 80s, you're getting stories that in the 50s never would have made it to print, but it's because society's changing.
Yeah, exactly.
Even the government wanted it to change.
Yeah.
So that's when the power of the CCA sort of went away. But yeah, that's essentially why Marvel did it first, is they were literally asked
to like put out something like showing drugs are bad.
Yeah, it was like a public service thing. The government literally asked them to basically go against the code.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's why they did it first.
What a fucking weird cycle that was.
DC was weird about it though. Like I think Carmine Infantino was the editor at the time, and he like publicly chastised Stan Lee. He was like, "How dare you defy the code?" And then they changed the code, and he was like, "We should put out a drug issue."
An asshole. Oh fuck. Next question comes from Raging G. He'll gouge out your eyes. Raging G. He's gonna bake you some pies.
That's a pretty good one. I like it. I mean, super dark.
Yeah.
Also delightful.
Well, yeah, it's the idea. Who asks, were there any stories from creators that were infuriated and had to heavily alter their stories because the CCA wouldn't allow them to exist?
I mean, yes, almost certainly. I mean, I think the problem with the CCA is we don't necessarily know what could have been. And after a certain point, it was so, if we're talking about, in the 70s and that, people did start getting to tell the stories they wanted to tell or closer to them.
Well, I mean,
because the CCA was losing its power. So, I mean, the closest I think that we get to understanding what the differences are when you look at those reprints, not necessarily only of DC, but of romance comics or not only of superheroes, but of romance comics and stuff like that, where you can see the edits made so that, sometimes it would be as simple as there'd be a panel of a criminal and his eyes would be like fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And then you'd see the postcode version and his eyes would just be like dead, like just kind of like. So it was like they deemed it too intense or like,
wow,
like really crazy stuff. I can only imagine that those reprints drove people nuts because they were like, that's not what I wrote. That's not what I drew.
I can't imagine. As like a person who creates art for a living,
I think
would make me crazy.
Under the code, people just knew what was expected of them, though. I don't know that through the 50s and 60s, people were really challenging it because I think they were just worried. So I don't know that I have necessarily like a specific example of someone being super frustrated until we get to that sort of Stan Lee thing.
Yeah.
Stan Lee, I think, very famously said, like, I never thought about the code. I mostly just wrote stuff they were fine with anyway, but as soon as I wrote something they weren't fine with, I just didn't put their seal on. He's like, I don't give a shit. Very classic Stan Lee.
Yeah. But also classic, like Marvel, especially in those eras where they weren't really trying to, like, bend, like, society, like, and culture. I think that's...
Well, I mean, Marvel gets around some of the stuff, too, where it's like, let's talk about the X-Men, right? It's very clearly about civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
But very wisely, somewhat wisely, somewhat problematically, the villains were not necessarily the cops.
Yeah.
Right? It's that there were two factions. There's a faction that wants their civil rights by violence, the Brotherhood of Mutants, Magneto loosely based on Malcolm X sort of type. And then there's, the Professor Xavier MLK, acceptance by peace sort of side.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like the cops were like, get out of here, mutant, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that the cops were corrupt or things like that. It was just, they made it internal. So you're technically skirting the CC.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, when comics got more nuanced, then it was like, no, society also hates you. like they were showing a broader
Yeah.
thing where law enforcement wasn't as peachy and all
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of stuff. But you would get around these little things. Marvel, you're right though, is always a little bit more rooted in the everyday.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe also is why they were less inclined to be beholden to it.
Yeah.
It was part of the Stan Lee like ethos, right? It was like, so I mean, maybe we should just be surprised that it took that long.
I mean, yeah, that's more importantly. All right, let's go to the next question. Well, we gotta leave Twitter and head on over to Instagram.
Now we're going to Instagram, take some questions and answer them.
First question comes from the real Josh Gill.
Gill.
Real Josh Gill
In your neighborhood.
in your area.
Yeah.
Good God, we were relentless that last episode. Man, you were just a part of this. Don't you dare.
You won't last 5 minutes with this Josh.
Oh, good God.
Do you think anyone clicks on those? Do you think anyone actually clicks on those ads
I think if you're lonely
or
enough,
plays those games?
I feel like they might.
What do you think the appeal of a fuck game is over just watching porn? Porn feels like it would be the better option.
At least it's interactive.
Is it?
The games, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, I guess. I see.
At least you're in control of what gets shown.
Oh, Jesus. It's a world I don't understand.
What, wanting control when it comes to sexual experiences?
Yeah, you're one to talk.
Ooh, I'm all about control until daddy gets involved.
Oh, no.
Just tell me what to do.
Daddy made a kitty.
That's right. Daddy made a gilly. To be fair, if anybody wondering, Josh Gill did message me and said that he was going to buy the JoshTube.net.
JoshTube.net.
Yeah.
I think we need a Cam Gill's shirt in the merch store.
The amount, there were so many shirts that we could make.
Oh my God. Especially lately. I feel like we got a lot of good stuff lately.
Good's a strong word, but yeah.
Romp in the Swamp.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Cage of Wolverine and Shrek Morrison.
What we need is somebody who's really good at comic book art.
Yes.
That's if anybody's secretly hiding a skill set.
That wants to help us with some like silly merch ideas.
Yeah, because I do not have the time.
Well, yes, of course. And I don't have the skill.
Oh, there we go. All we've got is the gill.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fill me to the gills. Josh Gill asks.
I'm so sorry, Josh.
I'm not. You were asking for it. What makes a telepath? Wait, no, God, no. That's from last week.
Oh, you fool.
I'm like, what?
The wheels are coming off.
Oh, they were never on. I'll pull them up really quickly. Hold on. You don't need to look for it.
No, I'm going to do it. We're going to.
If DC had beaten Marvel to the punch in a publishing outside the code, which title would have been more likely to be the torchbearer? Also, why do you think Marvel did it before DC? So we talked a bit about that.
Well, yeah.
They had reason with the government.
I told you why Marvel did it before DC. Well, I mean, generally. I think it's more in Marvel's ethos. And also, they were literally asked.
Yeah.
If DC had done it first... I guess the question is, what title at the time do you think would have been most suited to it? Superman could have been. Batman, if you were doing the corruption and law enforcement angle.
Yeah.
Superman would be interesting.
Because at least then
I think a Superman story in the same vein as that hard
what I
traveling
was
heroes thing.
Yeah.
Especially, in the 70s, we get introduced to Black Lightning, who is explicitly set in Metropolis.
Yeah.
Superman clearly does not visit the set. It would have been interesting maybe to see a story that is specifically like, hey, Superman, how come you don't save us?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that Superman is racist, but it's that he's not fully understanding what are the problems affecting this neighborhood. Why am I not focusing on this? Why am I not trying to help? Why am I not learning and empowering this neighborhood to save itself?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. That Superman might have been interesting for
Yeah.
that. Wonder Woman.
I mean, potentially for whatever reason, the government could have gone to DC first, and DC could have put out that to that Green Arrow
I'm willing to bet without having specific knowledge or evidence that they went to Marvel because Spider-Man was they were like, kids read Spider-Man.
Yeah.
More than anything else, they read Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Let's put this important story in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that was it. So if you're going for kids, it's probably Superman or Batman.
Yeah.
Probably not Green Arrow, because as we know, that series was struggling.
Yeah.
That's why Green Lantern and Green Arrow got paired together.
Yeah.
So
Superman more than likely, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's about reach, right? If we're saying like, who does the government approach, then it's kind of got to be Superman, I think. Also, Superman is interesting because he's.
Do you think Jimmy Olsen would have been into drugs? Feel like that's.
Oh, right. If it had been like in this alternate timeline, if DC does,
I feel like it would have been like Jimmy Olsen in like an alley, like getting handed a joint or something, and then Superman coming down, and be like, "Don't you know that joints can destroy your mind?"
Yeah. He just incinerates it with his heat vision. He's like, oh, thanks, Superman. He's like, oh no, I lit it.
Yeah.
Damn it.
That's like when they like burn the like marijuana crops, and everybody's just like, "All right." I should be more upset about this, but whoa.
When I lived in Niagara, like in Ontario for a bit, they found like a weed grow like on one of the vineyards or that, and they burned it. You could smell it.
Oh wow.
I mean, I wasn't close enough to get contact high, but like someone was.
Yes. The guy who's lighting it.
And they're like, how do we get rid of this horrible drug that if you burn it, it makes you high? Well, how about we burn it?
Yeah, I don't see what that'd be the problem. Yeah.
Perfect.
That'll teach us.
Hey, we found this big stash of crack rocks. Why don't we burn it?
Yeah. No, we got to get rid of it. The only way that I know how, consume it.
Yeah. We found this big pile of coke. We don't want anyone to snort this. We should snort this.
No, you know what it is? We need to make sure that we can always find it. Let's smell it so we never forget the scent.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect it would have been Superman probably if DC had sort of been approached or DC went first. Superman makes sense to me.
Yeah, for sure. Next question comes from, hey, Robbie's just this guy.
Robbie, how many weeks do I got to tell you? You're more than that.
Yeah.
You're a serial murderer.
Yeah.
You're a stalker of dreams and nightmares. You are
an author, potentially a doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a fugitive wanted across the globe. Probably more wanted than Carmen Sandiego at this point. Because the last time I checked, Carmen Sandiego wasn't murdering.
Wait a minute. I think I figured it out. Robert?
Okay.
Robbie.
Okay.
Robbie's not just this guy. Robbie's probably named Robert.
Sorry, that's what you figured out? That's the clue you cracked?
Yeah.
So now we just have to look for a Robert.
Yeah, easy.
How many of them could there be?
Can't be that many.
We're coming for you, Robbie's just this guy.
Yeah.
You son of a bitch, you're not going to hurt anyone else.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe, if we can find you in time.
Listen here, Frost. Figured it out.
You think it's Robert Frost?
Yeah. What other Robert is there?
Oh, wow. You think it's... I thought it was Robert Kennedy. From Beyond the Grave.
Oh my God, it's both of them. Cops and Roberts. I mean, it makes total sense.
Oh my God.
The story is old as time.
Get me the FBI.
I don't need to. I've already got the CIA.
Cops and Roberts.
Yeah, it's
just the two dumbest people trying to solve a crime.
Well,
the Hardley boys, am I right?
Yeah, hardly can get it up. I watched. You don't even have a dick anymore, so.
Well, yeah, that's what a vasectomy.
Yeah, I just cut it off.
Yeah, they just took a cigar.
We just wait. We cut off your balls or your dick? I don't know. It's all vasect to me.
There's no vas deferens there.
Oh, there we go. I watched the. I can't remember what it's called. That John Candy movie where he's like a shitty detective.
What movie is he? a
Who
detective
is?
in?
It's like Harry Crumb. Yeah, who is Harry Crumb?
I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, really?
Oh.
It's not a good movie, and it's like very problematic because it's all about like John Candy in disguises.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and he like
Pistachio disguisey?
worse. He portrays himself as like an Indian man.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh no. So what does Robbie ask?
Robbie asks, what were some racy comics released by DC that helped spark the perceived need to institute the CCA? I know about the history of Wonder Woman's bondage stuff, but what else? I don't even know if the bondage stuff was really the thing that spurred that.
Well, I mean, so that Wortham, the guy that made that Seduction of the Innocent, really had it out for Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Considered Wonder Woman to be like a threat to femininity, basically, because she was self-possessing and strong. And,
Yeah. God forbid.
you know, likely bisexual and all of these other
Yes.
things, right? Like, so Wortham really did hate Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I said, it's not necessarily that DC was putting out like racy stuff. Be like, and in this episode, Batman and Catwoman, fuck. Like they weren't doing that, and then the code was like, you can't do that. And they were like, oh, all right, she steals a diamond. Like,
But then Robin jerks him off.
to the bat signal.
That's what he called it. Dick.
How do you keep a good rhythm there? I just hum like na 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 na
Yeah.
na 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 na.
That all makes sense.
Get me a bat cigarette. But the Batman and Robin thing, like the idea of like what that relationship was called into question. It was never racy. Batman was never like, "Hey, old chum, wanna?" Although I think there may have been comics where they shared a bed, but it was always just meant to be like,
You know what rhymes with chum?
oh no. Hey, listen, when Aquaman orgasms, he chums.
Either way, it goes into other fish's mouth.
There's just a bunch of chum in the sea. You know what they say? There's plenty of other chum in the sea.
Oh, I'm gonna chum. Whoop, 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 whoop.
I can't believe that we are like almost 3 years into a podcast and have only now decided that Aquaman's orgasm is called chum.
Yeah, he's gonna chum. Yeah,
God, we're always learning new things.
I know.
Like I said, I don't think there was anything necessarily racy. It's not like they were doing hot and heavy comics or things like that. But you know, like Wonder Woman saving Steve Trevor, that he was, what did they call him? Like a gentleman in peril instead of a damsel in distress or whatever. It's like that. They were like, that's not right.
Yes.
You were like, what are you teaching our daughters? And then like Batman and Robin, they were like, why does he live with this strange man? They were just insinuating things that, I mean, they weren't there. I mean, it's easy for us now to go back and read things and be like, but like for the time, they were fine. It wasn't in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of the furor was that the problem, quote unquote, that they saw were things that like they considered problems at the time, like homosexuality.
Yeah.
So even if it wasn't racy or violent, if it was at all saying like, yeah, maybe Wonder Woman likes women, they'd be like, no, no. We can't look
That doesn't happen in real life, and it's not going to happen here.
Not in America.
Yeah.
In America, we hide our true selves until it destroys us as a society.
The true American way.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's not like there was like a particular issue that came out and they were like, that's it, final straw.
Yeah.
It was just the general sort of thing. And that Wortham was sort of whipping up. This basically blame game.
Whipping up?
This sort of blame game against comics, saying that like your children will grow up to be deviants and criminals if they read comic books, which is stupid.
Yeah.
We'll all grow up to be deviants and criminals because that's the human nature.
Yeah.
That's also not.
If anything, the ones that read comics are the least likely to do that.
Yeah, maybe.
Especially the ones that don't believe in the comics gate.
Oh, fucking Comics Gate.
That's it. We're gonna do a double dose, a double feature: Meatloaf and Comics Gate.
Oh no, I can't.
Comics Loaf.
Comics Loaf. Oh, pinch of Comics Loaf here.
Meat Gate. There we go. We solved it. Let's go to the next question.
All right, let's do it.
I'm glad I got the key to your Meat Gate.
Oh no. Don't call it a meat gate. Oh, Jesus. Good God. I didn't even think of that as a connotative. Don't call any orifice a meat gate.
Think of it more of a meat entrance.
Meat
Why
foyer.
are-
It's a meat foyer.
Yeah. Why are we putting up gates? Why walls? What? Just let it all flow.
Yeah. It's a meat veranda.
One of my favorite Creed jokes in The Office is when he's talking about it, he's like, it was the 70s, we were sliding around in mud. A man could have slipped in. How was one to know?
Well, it's true.
Yeah, I really like that. All right, next question comes from Damiana Dimok.
Yeah.
When the walls fell.
Oh, what an amazing reference.
I'm surprised that this podcast should just import
Shaka
on
with
itself. The walls. Damiana and Dimok.
Damiana
And Dimok.
Dimok and Jalad at Tanagra.
Yeah.
Shaka
God.
when the walls fell.
I want that fucking shirt so bad. The
one that looks like a
live performance.
Great Star Trek reference.
God damn it.
Love that. Or Damiana. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. I'm sorry.
Damiana is a name.
Is it Damiana?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Either way, thank you for writing in.
Yes. They ask, we spent some time on CCA in the comics class I took at University of South Florida.
Very cool.
Also, wow, South Florida has a comic book class. That's
apparently not everything in Florida sucks.
Yeah, it's not all just falling into the ocean. Yeah. It was a way to get us into subculture of comics with an X. Because our instructor, R. Claire Stevens, wanted to show you didn't need to be Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons to write a good comic.
Sure.
Were there any infamous instances of artists/writers pushing their luck too far? As a self-regulatory body, CCA acts as a buffer between the creators, publishers, and the government prosecution. Do you think the industry cracked down harder than the government would have in an effort to prevent getting on the radar prosecutors?
I mean, I think we've talked about that a bit already so far.
For sure.
I have a suspicion that they did go further than the government would have.
Yeah.
In terms of the government wasn't forcing them to act yet. They did it themselves. They probably went further than the government did. However, if they had done nothing and it kept getting pushed in that, then would the government's retaliatory regulation have been even worse?
I think you can look at the 80s with Nancy Reagan. I think typically the government, and I mean any government, typically only responds when the general public pushes hard enough back at them. So when you get groups like what's the Mothers? Like groups like MAD and organizations where it's a body of like general citizens who are pushing government to make decisions. That's typically only the government responds because they're looking for re-election. So they
and I think that was sort of happening I think there was a general public concern about, as I said, juvenile delinquency. Very broad term, could mean literally
in the 50s.
anything.
I mean, especially in the 50s, because you get a lot of the greaser culture and that sort of comes hand in hand with delinquency.
Yep. And so, I mean, I suspect that if in 1954 the government was like, you guys can regulate yourselves or we'll regulate you.
Yeah.
The CCA was more than the government would have done.
For sure.
But if they hadn't done it then, and then we get to 1956 or 1957 and the government says we can't not do anything about this, that probably would have been worse.
Yeah.
I mean, that's of course speculative, but that's sort of my feeling about it.
But had they just given in to the government at that point, I think that there's a potential that it would have not been as extreme because I think
if in 1954 they were like, well, do you mind government writing regulations for us? I think it would have been less than what the Comics Code was.
Without a doubt.
I agree.
I think so because government was really just looking to be seen as making a decision. They got their action just by asking for there to be the censorship.
But like you mentioned, I think it may have been less stringent, but it also would have been more propaganda.
Well, because then you're giving government control at that point, and it's less about what can't happen, more about what they're asking to be put.
I would be more worried about that than the restrictions. I think at that point,
I totally think so. But so, was there a case of people pushing too far during that time?
I mean, almost certainly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I know
Yeah.
them. Again, you know, because some of these things only came out like way later. Like some of them are these sort of like apocryphal, like insider industry stories.
For
like,
sure.
I'm sure there's stories that got pitched and they were just like, it's never going to fly. No. And people were pissed about it. Or I'm sure that people, you know.
Was there anything that went out that like then got shut down by the Comics Code?
Comics Code would deny things.
Yeah.
But,
okay. But you wouldn't have found out about them, yeah.
And like I said, in those early days where they depended on the wholesalers, if the Comics Code said no, then your comic wouldn't go out, basically, because the distributor wouldn't take it. So it was just, there was no argument.
I'd be curious.
It was later when things were, when there was direct market, like a growing direct market sales where you didn't need the distributors anymore, then you're sort of bypassing the enforcement arm. That's where you start getting things where it's like, oh, well, we'll just send it out ourselves by subscription or something. Or now there's comic book. We're just going to sell straight to the comic book store. We're just going to sell straight to them. We don't need a distributor.
Yeah.
That's where you got around it. That distributing wholesaler thing was the only enforcement tool. So as soon as the code itself started getting amended and there was more of a access to direct market sales, now the code had no actual
there was
strength.
no teeth, right?
There's no enforcement arm. What does it mean, right? And then by the time you get into the 80s and 90s, now you got Vertigo and like just imprints that were like, you know, Marvel in 2001 said, oh, they finally said we're ditching the code and we just have our own, we just put our own age ratings on the thing. And they go, all right. Like the code itself becomes meaningless if people don't all buy into it. Because it was, again, not government. It wasn't a law. There was no, you didn't have to publish with the code. Gold Key Comics, which published a bunch of like Disney things and stuff like that, never submitted to the code. But they were also answering to Disney. Disney was never going to put something out that would have contravened the code anyway. So Gold Key Comics, which did a bunch of the old Star Trek comics and Disney stuff and like, you know, Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck and stuff like that. Those comics never had the seal because it wasn't mandatory, but it didn't need to. It was Disney. You knew what you were getting. Yeah. So
it acted as itself as a...
As soon as there were enough channels for these sort of mainstream superhero ones to go through that didn't involve the code became meaningless, essentially.
That being said, I mean, even with it being, especially now, like non-existent, I think that you're still looking at opportunities where general public will act as a body. I mean, a great example is the Dick recently, the Batman's Dick.
Oh, yeah. Which, again, though, DC Black Label, and they said mature.
Yeah.
And it was like, what did you expect?
Yeah.
I actually disagreed with DC.
Oh, without a doubt.
With them going back and shading out the Dick.
I agree.
It's like, no, like you told people what this was. If they're getting upset, they're the idiots.
Yeah.
It's like when people bring a kid to an R-rated film, they go, that was violent. It's like, yeah, fuck yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Like... Don't bring your 4-year-old to John Wick.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Don't watch the halftime show if you're worried about getting turned on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they made me impure. It's like, I'm going to sue you. Yeah, I'm going to sue you. Oh, they're doing it again.
No, I'm mad at you for making me sue you.
You devil witch, please have sex with me.
All right. Let's leave Instagram.
Okie dokie.
And head on over to Reddit.
Where everyone's nice and no one's ever mean.
Not even once. Not a single time. Literally always super nice. Positive.
There are no examples of anyone on Reddit being less than pleasant.
Give me one.
I defy you.
You can't. It's impossible. It's impervious.
I will
to.
eat this sandwich if you can prove that anyone has been.
He doesn't even have a sandwich. That's how confident he feels.
Yeah. I will eat it. This one.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. First question comes from Benny Servant 2.
Oh, hey, Benny is bringing plates out for 2 people.
But there's 3 of us. What a maniac.
Benny only serves 2.
Yeah. Benny's insane. It's out of control.
But Benny serving 2. Benny! Benny serving 2.
Yeah. I feel like we sufficiently got that one done.
Yeah.
Benny asks, how come the Comics Code Authority didn't have an impact on Vertigo Comics?
Right. So Vertigo Comics was founded in like 93 or 92 or something like that. And by that time, like I said, the power of the code was almost entirely like moot. Like it just didn't matter. There was so many direct market sales. Even distributors by that time were like, we'll sell these anyway. Like, we're not going to get in trouble. Like, even the distributors weren't enforcing their own thing. The code essentially, and the code had been manipulated and changed so many times to allow for more nuanced storytelling and more depictions of certain things that, like, it didn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
So, and Vertigo was also deliberately marketed to mature readers. So what the code was set up to do was, quote unquote, protect children. But if you were writing something that was like, this is for adults, then it sort of didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So same sort of thing. Like Vertigo, when Vertigo was founded, it also incorporated things that were already being published, like Swamp Thing, Hellblazer, stuff like that, Sandman. So all of those things were already being marketed to mature readers. We'd already established that, like, we don't 100% need the code anymore.
Yeah.
The distributors don't even care about it, and we can direct sell. So by the time Vertigo came around, it was like, well, do what you want.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say the code didn't exist, because it did until 2011. The last 2 publishers to even have the seal on any comic books or still participate in the code at all were DC and Archie. And DC stopped in 2011 with the new 52, and they were like, we're just going to put our own age ratings on. Now it says like T for teen or stuff like that.
Rated T for teen.
Exactly. And Archie was like, I think you know what you're getting with Archie. Like, so.
Until now, I mean. Archie got real dark.
Well, that's true, yeah. Well, that show, man.
Fuck.
Crazy.
I mean, and Archie, what a snap.
There's a lot of teacher fucking in that show.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Wish we had that to Saved by the Bell.
Jesus.
I'm going to bell that ding.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah.
What was the question? I just got lost in a Saved by the Bell fanfic there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've all had that dream. What character... Oh, sorry. How come the Comics Authority didn't have impact on Vertigo?
Oh, right. So, I mean, for all of a multitude of reasons, including that society had a demand for more nuanced storytelling, that we knew probably that the general audience of comic books was older than it was.
Yeah.
Like everything, all of those different factors combined basically made the code sort of just like a rubber stampy thing, but like it didn't really have meaning anymore. By the time you got to the 90s in Vertigo comics, the code means nothing.
Well, especially as
it signified something, but it wasn't important. It wasn't an actual regulatory body. Your comic wouldn't not get bought or distributed if you didn't have it. Like, it was just also there. It was just a thing.
I think as you get through the 60s to the 80s, I mean, comics are also just getting so popular that like the approval process to be able to get a comic through an association would be so over demanding. I can't imagine.
I don't know about that. Because the 80s is when, the late 70s, early 80s is the DC implosion, where the sales tank, and they have to cancel a bunch of titles, and then they end up with only like a dozen ongoing titles or something like that.
There really wasn't that many.
And then in the 90s, that was when Marvel almost went under.
Yeah.
which is why they sold off movie
Okay, that's
rights
fair. Yeah,
to
that's fair.
a bunch of their characters. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's about the popularity of them, but I think it's just, society moved on. There were too many channels outside of the code to sell your comics, and we had just like a better understanding of what the audience was and what stories could do and should do, Because it's not just Vertigo. Superman straight up dies in the 90s.
Yeah.
They kill him on panel.
Jeez.
Batman gets his back snapped in the 90s on panel. All of those things are the quote unquote depictions of violence you would never see when the code had strength or meaning or anything. In the anatomy lesson in Swamp Thing, he's literally being surgically cut open and having his organs removed that issue.
Yeah.
You would never get that in the 50s. So, by the time Vertigo comes around, we're past the code now. Now we're just into storytelling. Vertigo can do its own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Next question comes from Never Say Die, Iron Joker 33, who asks, what characters were most changed by the implementation of the Comics Code Authority? Did it lead to creation of any or even some disappearing entirely? I mean,
well, we've talked about the disappearing. Like Two-Face and Catwoman are great examples. And even Joker, although that was more because I think they got bored of him. Because Joker was still around in the code era for a bit.
But when you take a lot of the psychosomatic parts of Joker away, it's it's not a really that interesting of a character.
Well, no, he just becomes
a clown.
Yeah. Like, oh, I've got a flower. It squirts water.
I don't know why why it's Jay Leno. Yeah.
Well, I'm the Joker.
Yeah. Thanks, Holly.
Oh, I thought you were doing Black Lightning.
No, I was doing the bass player guy.
Oh, sure. I thought you were doing Black
But
Lightning.
in this situation, has that same voice, but is also Harley Quinn.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Hilarious. Did we create any characters, do you think?
I mean, not specifically. I don't think anyone was like, here's your new code-approved character.
Yeah.
People were going to make new characters anyway, but the way they made them would have been shaped by the code.
For sure.
So it's possible that some of the characters that we got, we got a sillier or a more neutered version of them. Maybe we would have gotten a more modern incarnation of them earlier if the code hadn't existed. But I don't know that you could look at the code and be like, the code made this character.
I mean, you can look at 50s Aquaman and...
Well, I mean, God, Aquaman had for so long such a just pitiful roster of who gives a shit about these villains. I mean, the code would have affected how new characters were created, but I don't know that you could point to anything and say this was specifically created because of the code. You know what I mean? I think that's maybe too difficult an exercise.
What about who do you think was the most drastically changed? Which comic series or character?
I mean, I hate that it's always about him. It's got to be Batman. Batman went from such a pulpy detective, sort of grim, corrupt, grimy thing to the reason that 60s Batman show is silly is they are leaning into what the comics already were, which was silly. We've seen that cover before. It's like, Batman, why are you wearing the pink batsuit? You wore orange yesterday. He goes, it's the only way, Robin. I must wear a different color batsuit every night. Just silly. Yeah. Not to say that silly doesn't have a place in there. I'm fine with silly stories, but they took all of the grime out of Batman. And we probably in the 80s went too far back the other way, with Frank Miller and stuff like that. We put too much grime in Batman. Somewhere in the middle is where it should sit. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the oscillation of the Batman character, from the Golden Age to the Silver Age to, through Bronze Age with Ra's al Ghul and stuff like that, Modern Age, I think that's the character that's probably swung around the most.
Yeah, especially when you've seen that dick.
Oh, Superman, even though he probably softened a bit as a personality, Superman's relatively consistent.
Yeah.
The quality of the stories is obviously better without the code because it's a little less silly.
Mm-hmm.
But his character is more intact, I would say, than Batman's.
For sure.
Or at least, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. Let's leave Reddit and go to email.
Check the email. Nice.
Yeah. This question comes from Jesse.
Yes.
From Puff Cheek Pastries makes lots of food, makes delicious treats for me. I wish I could cook.
Beautiful.
Oh, fucking orgasmic. I'm gonna chum. I don't know how people could ever
If we
think.
get to 100 reviews, Richard will get "I'm gonna chum" tattooed on himself.
Oh yeah, cover me in chum.
But it also still is just dead fish.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it comes out of him.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah, it's actual chum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something smells fishy. Sorry, it's been a long night. Jess.
Aquaman, why are there chum stains on your pants? Again, if anyone out there is a good artist, wants to help with some merch, if you want to make some chum merch, you don't think people would definitely wear it in public? Just Aquaman jerking off, saying, "I'm gonna chum."
Just a bucket that says chum on it.
A chum bucket.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to do a sample.
Yeah.
Trying to.
Where do you put it when you're done with it? Oh, just in the chum dumpster.
Yeah. Oh man,
here's the shirt. It's Aquaman.
Yeah.
He's facing away. He's sitting at a computer, and he's on Pornhub, and he's typing in chum shot.
He really wanted. He just looking for the money though, so he just was looking at the chumpilations.
Chumpilations. Begging for chum.
Just like dolphins.
This is really horrible, really insidious kind of. I mean, this is what you've come to expect if you listen to the show.
It's Aquaman. It's either way. It's ending up in a fish mouth.
Oh no.
Jesse asks, "Hello and long time no ask. I have a question and a fun dial doc."
Ooh. Great, those.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, at least you got time. The stamp from the CCA was once seen as the only way a comic could be printed. The last time the stamp was used on a Marvel comic was 2001.
Yes.
And DC 10 years later in 2011. Why do you believe there was such a large gap in time from ceasing use of the stamp from both companies?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, DC was always a weirdly strong proponent of the code. Like, to the point where they didn't put out their drug story until the code allowed it.
Yeah.
What
do you think that is about the sort of like management?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it clearly says something, about the editorial or whatever, that they were like, this is important. Or
was it the same president through a lot of that time period?
I don't think so.
No.
But because it's such a vast time period. We're talking about from 1954 to 2011.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I'm willing to bet that at a certain point, the code meant so little that it didn't matter. They were just like, well, this is what we do. We just submit it. We get the seal when we put it out.
I know that Marvel really...
2011 probably made sense for DC to finally cut ties because they were like, well, we're rebooting everything anyway. Everything's going to say New 52 on it. We might as well have our own rating system like Marvel does.
Yeah.
And they just did it all at once.
I know that Marvel...
Why they didn't do it earlier, I don't know that I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Frankly, even Marvel, that it took until 2001
Well, I know that I know Marvel's case 2001, like I know Marvel had a huge response to the 9/11 attacks. And I feel like a lot of their books sort of took a big change around that, and I was sort of like a lot.
I guess a lot of this stuff takes place in New York. Yeah,
yeah. So I feel like there's.
Oh, maybe.
I think that might have an association because that's right around the exact same time the terrorism attacks were happening, and they wanted to respond to that.
I suppose that's possible. Although I also have a hard time imagining that the code would have prevented them, but maybe they just saw it as the right time anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's maybe a fair point. Yeah, I don't know why DC took another 10 years, other than they just always seem to have been weirdly supportive of the code. Yeah, I don't think I have a better answer than that. I'm sorry. But yeah, Marvel definitely, in multiple circumstances, led the way in abandoning the code or pushing the code.
Which is funny because I find that DC tends to be a bit, like, especially nowadays, are way more extreme with the types of stories that they're telling.
Well, and even 80s and 90s, DC probably had a higher quality of storytelling.
Yeah, but they also went a lot darker, I think.
Like, Swamp Thing, Hellblazer, Sandman, even, like Dark Knight Returns, even though it's a museum piece. Now, like, all of that stuff, the Hard Traveling Heroes thing, all of those things are, I think, harder hitting stories than the equivalent Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The code, I think, just became a thing people forgot about. Like, it was just
why it even exists. Like, it was just a thing that was on a book.
I mean, really anything after the late 80s, it's a surprise that they kept doing it. So it's a surprise Marvel kept doing it to 2001. It's a
considering
bigger
they didn't give a shit about it in the
DC kept
60s.
doing
Yeah.
it till 2011.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what that means. Let's start with Jesse's, but maybe we talk about what Dial Dock is.
It's the Dial Dock. It's based on Dial H for Hero, where you get the magic H dial. You type in hero, you become a never before seen hero or villain with crazy powers and a wacky name. And we do this every week. We come up with a brand new hero or villain. So let's hear Jesse's first.
Well, speaking of stamps, such as the Comics Code Authority, Jesse's character is Stampede.
Oh.
Has a magical stamp that allows a person to control whoever they stamp. They have urine-based telekinesis now.
Stampede.
Much like Mira can control water, but with pee.
Right. They have Eurokinesis.
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, that's not the weirdest or grossest thing that's ever been said in this
Not
segment.
the first pee-based one, I'm sure.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, mine is also penis related.
Big surprise.
I told you
It's a banner week for your penis.
I told you last week
Yeah.
I would do something genital related.
That's true. I mean, you said that the other night too.
Yeah. My character is called Vaz Referens.
Okay.
So what Vaz Referens is able to do...
Mm-hmm.
I defy you to guess how I came up with this.
I don't know. Maybe it's something you already said during this episode.
Shut up. What Vaz Referens is able to do is basically he has knowledge inside him.
Yeah.
Knowledge of anything.
Wow. Okay.
But he's not always able to get it out. He has the potential for any knowledge, for like countless knowledge, but he's got about a 1 in 4,000 shot of that knowledge making it out.
Is that true? Is that still a possibility?
Yeah.
Really? You can still?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he's also got to like wait 3 months after he first gets the...
God, is that true too?
yeah.
Good God.
Yeah. Vaz
I think
Referens...
you're going to jump.
Vaz Referens has the potential to know anything.
Yeah.
But he's got a 1 in 4,000 shot of it making it out, making that knowledge actually doing anything.
Good God. That's insane. So just eloquent and beautiful analogy.
Well,
It's on the mind. You're not going to chum.
Well, I was not going to do much.
Yeah. Not that it ever did that much, but...
Fuck you!
I'll do my character now.
Yeah.
Keeping within the theme.
Of Vaz reference?
No.
Oh, comics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That theme. Right. The theme of the episode. I'm with you.
My character's name is Polly Seas, which is an administrative pirate.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. So C's like SEAS?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an administrative pirate.
Of course.
A pirate who has access to an unlimited knowledge of rules, legislation,
Right.
bureaucracy, laws, and procedure, all that have existed. And he uses these abilities to impede their whoever they're going against by pulling up rules that would directly affect the things that they're trying to do.
Sure. Right.
So if you had like the Legion of super villains or something like that, he would be able to pull up, like he would know what random administrative policies there are for that organization that they may be able to pull into to stop them from doing whatever they're doing.
Sure. Right. Understood. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I like the world where even villains adhere to their own internal policies.
Hey, because if you don't have rules, I mean, it's just anarchy.
Yeah.
And what villain wants that?
Anarchy.
Oh.
Oh, God.
Fucking so stupid. You're so stupid.
Fucking idiot.
I'm gonna fucking kill myself. Oh,
Oh,
my God.
Jesus.
Oh, God. Oh, no, now I'm gonna jump.
I mean, it's such a dark series of thoughts there. I do want to say those are our dial dogs.
Yeah.
But if you want to learn more about the Comics Code, we've touched on different things. We've talked a little bit about different aspects of it. If you want to learn more about it, there's lots of writings out there and cool stuff. Our friends over at the Lantern Cast talked about it a bit when they did their series about Green Lantern, Green Arrow.
Yep.
There's some cool stuff there. I think you can, if you go to like different academic sort of publications, you can find those things. If you just want to read Seduction of the Innocent and see what they were up against, you can read that too.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of cool stuff out there. I'm sure this is not the last time we'll talk about it.
No.
But if you're interested in that sort of era and that like what was happening and that sort of thing, there's lots of cool reading you can do. So go check that stuff out.
Check out your local library.
That's right.
But on the speaking of dial docs, we would love to hear what characters you guys can come up with. So use the hashtag DialDoc to send us your character or send us a question for next week's episode.
Yeah, next week we are
That's right.
we are talking about Birds of Prey.
And we've got a special guest.
We do have a special guest. It's Tess Janos is coming on from the ongoing comic book discussion podcast.
That's right.
So we're very excited. She's very cool. That's an awesome podcast. Check it out if you don't listen to it already.
And most likely you're part of the Radiverse that we are now included in. And Tess was recently on This Is Rad. So,
that's right. She was on the roller derby episode because she's
fucking rad.
She's a cool derby girl. So she's going to be on next week to talk to us about Birds of Prey, probably with some specific insight about the roller derby elements from the movie.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to be just talking about the Birds of Prey in general, not specifically the movie.
No.
Any comics, any of the characters involved in that. So, send your questions. It's going to be a fun one.
So you can do so through our various social media platforms, such as our Facebook,
Dr. DC Podcast,
our Twitter,
at Dr. DC,
Instagram,
Dr. DC Podcast,
email,
drdcpodcast@gmail.com,
of our subreddit,
r/Dr_DC.
Of course, the doc phone is now open.
208-917-3238.
That's 208-917-DCEU. And of course, you can go to our website,
drdcpodcast.com or .ca.
And don't forget to give us a 5-star review.
Give us a 5-star review.
We're lacking one this week. We need to get the ball rolling again, babies.
Yeah, what the fuck? Leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That's obviously where it helps us the most, but also Facebook. If you listen on one of those like other sort of podcast things, if you can
snap a shot and
if you
send it
can
to
like
us.
rate us or review us on Podbean or anything like that, send it in.
We'll read it on the show.
It all helps. We'll read it on the show, and if we get to 100, we will do something.
Yes.
How enticing is that?
Yeah.
Completely non-committal.
That's the way I like to live, baby. Except for the whole marriage thing, but
The marriage thing. Your unconditional love for Kyle Clark.
Yeah. I have a mortgage. I guess that's a pretty big commitment. But
I mean, if anything, you're all commitment.
Yeah, unfortunately.
What do you mean, unfortunately?
I need to get out of here.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm hitting the trains. Getting out of here. I got my bindle's waiting.
Ride the rails.
Yep, that's how I'm going to solve this problem. And of course, every single week, not only do we put out an extra episode every single Friday, we also have a video episode that comes out on the same day as this.
Yeah, that's right.
Wednesdays. So all you have to do is go to our Patreon.
Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/DrDC. If you sign up at the Silver Age level, it's $5 a month. You get that double dose extra episode every Friday.
But for $7 a month,
Golden Age level, you get
still less than Netflix.
You get that. You get a
way
video.
better content on here.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
so much. I mean, yeah, we also have The Crown.
Yeah.
You get that video episode, the
Yeah.
prescribed reading, where we talk about something I'm currently reading. You get to vote on episode themes. You get to participate. That way, you get some merch discounts and all sorts of stuff. So, sign up, Silver Age or Golden Age, over on Patreon.com/DrDC.
All right, little babies, that's it for this week.
Adios.
Ciao, ciao.
Heroes, they always fight for what is right. Live with danger and adventure, they are men of might.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.